MOvember, day 4, and for tonight's video I will be looking at people pleasing, which I'm pulling this piece of information from the work of Pia Mellody, her literature Breaking Free, which is a workbook that went with her first ever published book, Facing Codependence. If that book was released now, it would be called Developmental Trauma, and the people pleasing that I'll be talking about in this video is the learned response of a child towards a caregiver in any form on this continuum of the self-centered and stressed parenting, where a child needs to get their needs met, so they learn to people please their parent, right up until grotesque abuse that can happen in family systems, sexual, physical abuse, where this people pleasing can even be in a fawn type limbic survival response. So this can cover quite a gamut. It has these observable features though, and so what I'm going to do is take you through these features, which is that all people pleasing has three pillars. It is dishonest, it results in unnecessary arguments, and then ends up and promotes resentment towards others. So let me take you through those three elements. So I will read from Pia's book, my old beat up copy here, on these issues. So the first one, dishonesty. You give up what you really want and do what someone else wants because you're doing so pleases that person. You avoid saying what you mean because you believe saying something else would please that person more. You make commitments to people for things that you do not want to do or cannot do without a lot of trouble. Even things you don't know how to do, so that you have to go through a learning process before you can accomplish the thing you have agreed to do. And a lot of developmentally traumatized people with damaged boundaries do this. We'll agree to something, we have to go and learn to do it, and puts us under so much stress that funds the resentments we're going to talk about shortly. You deceive the other person into thinking, 1, that you like to do these things because you commit to do them. 2, that the things you say represent your true feelings, your true self. And 3, that you do and say these things because they enhance your own life and make you happy in and of themselves. So how this dishonesty sabotages your life? The other person cannot relate to the real person you are because you have hidden yourself from him or her. This then leads to unnecessary arguments. When you are people-pleasing, you are embroiled in commitments and activities that do not enhance your life or bring you joy, but you tell yourself that you are willing to do them to please the other person, and that person's pleasure enhances your life. The problem with this is if the person doesn't exhibit the pleasure you think he or she should, or doesn't express gratitude for your participation in the activity, your life is not enhanced, and that you feel anger, fear, and pain. The purpose of putting yourself through these undesirable behaviors and commitments has backfired, and instead of enhancement, you feel diminished by your anger, fear, and or pain. In your codependence or developmental trauma, you are very likely to hold the other person responsible for your diminishment. And this is where we go into blame. Since you deceived the other person into thinking that you chose these commitments and behaviors, expressing your anger directly sounds bizarre to the other person. The other person's response is something like, "But I thought you wanted to eat at this restaurant," or "I thought that you preferred to go alone to pick up the children." Your deception causes an automatic deadlock in communication. So how this sabotages your life? The other person is deceived, baffled, and defensive. You have subjected that person to unnecessary arguments and attacks, growing out of your misdirected anger at the person for things he or she has no awareness of. So you can end up in these really crazy arguments. Now, what even makes this more difficult is that for a lot of us, we're not aware we're doing this. This whole section in the book where Pia uses the 12 steps to look at how we have developed these survival techniques and mechanisms is about coming into awareness of and out of denial into how we act out this stuff that we learned in earlier life. So it can be quite shocking. Carl Jung said if we don't make the unconscious conscious, it will direct our life, and we'll call it fate. And so we are really trying to get conscious about how these things impact others. And we'll talk a little bit about that in the what to do with this soon. So as a result, unnecessary arguments then lead to resentment towards others. And let me read. This one's a little longer because it gives an example of how this plays out. When you engage in people pleasing, you often assume that a non-spoken agreement exists between you and the other person and that he or she will treat you in a similar people pleasing manner. After you've given up what you want to do in favor of pleasing the other person, a time comes when you expect the same courtesy from the other person. When the person who has no idea what this non-spoken agreement is in your mind does not reciprocate, resentment builds, and you subject the other person to your retaliation, whether it be aggressive and outright anger or passive retaliation on a more subtle level. And this is where a lot of us folks that have had developmental trauma that have this people pleasing, that sort of silent violence and that sulking and that passive aggression, the passive aggressive use of humor, all of this comes into play, and it's really difficult and painful when you have to start to take responsibility for it. So Pia goes on to say, I'm not talking about when you make a clear choice to compromise and, for example, go with the other person to a certain movie, as long as the reason for your choice is clear to the other person. For example, a choice between seeing one of two movies, a comedy and a spy mystery, comes up. You might prefer a spy mystery while the other person really enjoys comedies more. If you can say, comedies are not my favorite kind of movie, but I'll go with you because you want to see it and because I want to be with you, next time we go to a movie, I'd like us to go see a spy mystery and would enjoy having you go with me. That is clear communication. Even if the other person does not want to go to the spy mystery, he or she is not deceived into thinking you preferred the comedy. The situation becomes people-pleasing when you pretend to prefer the comedy and withhold from the other person the honest reason you are going to the comedy. Then later, when you bring up the spy mystery movie and the other person's response is lukewarm or negative, resentment pops up. And you think that's not fair. I cheerfully went to the comedy with him or her, and now it's her turn, his or her turn. He never does things that I want to do. So now we're really in the resentment, right? We're re-feeling this. You turn sour and sullen, distancing yourself, and the other person has no idea what is going on with you. So how this sabotages your life, the other person is subjected to your unexpected retaliation methods when your resentment comes up about something he or she did not have information about. Now, if you're living out this defect, it's pretty awful. The dishonesty that we live in is really hard because we're not owning our reality. For some of us, we've got a lot of dissociative trauma, so not knowing our reality can be an issue. But for most of us, we're shame-based as a result of that trauma, and I know my reality, but I just can't say it. And that's where people-pleasing steps in. But that's where it leads to these unnecessary arguments because it's crazy making to someone else. And then we fall back into resentment and either attack somebody and now they really think we've lost it, or we go into that passive-aggressive withdrawal and that really confuses them as well. So what to do with this? Then Pia just outlined some questions for journaling and introspection that we can either take to a sponsor in a 12-step fellowship, a pastor maybe in a Christian situation, or we can bring to a professional in therapy to go a bit deeper and get to the bottom of this. So the first question is, how does people-pleasing harm you? And we need to look at that. How is this keeping us stuck somewhere? What sort of relational stress and trauma does this keep creating? And how does it keep me from being in recovery? Now, recovery is one of those odd words, but for you guys in recovery, it's not odd to us. But for someone that's new listening, recovery is just a commitment to mental health and a commitment to honesty, no matter what the cost. So it's this commitment to reality. And so if we're in recovery and we're an alcoholic, well, our commitment to reality is sobriety. And so with this, it's if I've got this developmental trauma trait, then my commitment to recovery is trying to heal from acting this out continuously in my life, leading to resentment and unnecessary argument. So we take these questions into our journaling, into our prayer life, into our professional relationships and peer relationships to try and answer that so we can start to see it more clearly and come into awareness. The next question is, how does it affect others? Can we start to get some empathy? When we have developmental trauma and have these traits as a result, it's largely a developmental immaturity. So learning empathy is a little bit trying to get a 5-year-old to share. It's pretty hard sometimes. So the idea here is I've got to start to tune into what's the data I'm getting, the incoming data I'm getting I might be tuning out from others. Let's tune into that. Now that's painful because it's so good to be righteous and think it's everyone else's fault, right? So when we have to look at the impact we have on others, it can get a little painful. So how does this affect others adversely, and how does it block intimacy? How does this get in the way? Obviously, if I'm being dishonest and not telling you my reality, then the block's pretty evident. And if I start acting that stuff out with argument and resentment, then we're going to get a lot of data here. And this is a really good opportunity to get clearer of how the impact of this is on our relationships and self. The next one's a big one, and this is where the steps really come into it. And even with atheists and agnostics, this can still be a useful tool. Pia will say, are you ready to have your higher power? Now, if you're an atheist or agnostic in recovery, that could be the literature, the power of the group, the community that you're in, and you can access a lot of support to help people encourage you to release this and learn assets as you release the defect. For folks that have a spiritual concept or a Christian concept, then here, this is where we really take it and hand it over to God. We're asking for that supernatural intervention. We're asking God to come into this with us and relieve us. We're handing this over. So are you ready to have your higher power, God, remove this defect and learn to live without it? Pia says that when we start to act in our own best interest and start to set personal boundaries in recovery, initially it feels awful, shameful, as though we're doing something wrong. And so what we've got here is an opportunity to say, okay, if I release this, I'm going to have to learn how to live without it because I haven't got that skill set. My script and wiring is all about this fawning, this people pleasing. So I'm going to have to put some effort now into learning other ways to act in my own best interest, knowing that the consequence of that will be I'm going to have to be uncomfortable for a while because this is going to feel odd and awful and shameful as though I'm doing something wrong. So if I'm not, what am I gaining from hanging on to it? Now, I know whenever I've been a client in therapy, I really hate this question. It's like, well, I'm here paying you money to get rid of it. Why would I be hanging on to it? But it's really interesting sometimes when we start to see, well, what are the benefits of this? I mean, people pleasing really does, open doors for people at times, and we fawn towards others, and we'll take that hit on the intimacy front because I just want to be safe, and it's the only way I know how to get my needs met. So really getting aware of, well, what do I, by continuing with this, what do I actually get out of it? What's going on for me? And that can be a really useful part of the introspection of therapy, as we can isolate these reasons of what we're getting out of it, and we can start to surrender it so we can practice those boundaries and start to walk free. So I hope this was helpful. If it started to grab your interest, as I said, the book is Breaking Free, Pia Mellody. I do run some courses on this, but this is a MOvember video. So if you can follow the links in regards to the MOvember campaign, and if you can donate to mine or anyone you know that's trying to grow a Mo. I, as you can see, have not decided on. I didn't grow this in 4 days. I'm doing a Mo maintenance month because I just couldn't bear shaving this one off this time round, and I'm doing a MOvember campaign, and they're posted regularly on the website. So with that, please be gentle with your heart, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow in the next video. Bye.